we're going to have a look at Australian time zones. There's 2 pages to our reference sheet. I've already started to have a bit of a fill-in on this one here, but we'll go through the information. So in Australia, we actually have 3 time zones. We have one down the eastern side where we live, which is Australian Eastern Standard Time. One down the middle, where Northern Territory and South Australia are. That's Australian Central Standard Time. And then we have Australian Western Standard Time. As you go from New South Wales to Australian Central Time, they're a half an hour behind us. When it's midday in New South Wales, it's only 11:30 in South Australia. And then as you go to the western side of the country, Western Australia is 2 hours behind what it is in New South Wales. So as you travel east, that's this way. As you travel west, that's that way. So when you move east, you're going to add on a time difference. And when you move west, you're going to subtract a time difference. So this is a timeline with 0 being at Australian Eastern Standard Time. Over here, if you've got the Australian time zones on a timeline with Western Australia as 0 hours, you're going to add on 1.5 hours to get from Western Australia to Central Time, and you're going to add 2 hours in total to Australian Eastern Standard Time. So there's only a half hour difference between these 2 time zones, but there is a 1.5 hour difference between these 2 time zones. It's 9 a.m. in Perth. What time is it in Adelaide? So if it's 9 a.m. in Perth, it's 1.5 hours later in Adelaide, because Adelaide's in the middle of South Australia. So that makes it 10:30 a.m. in Adelaide. If it's 2 p.m. in Brisbane, Brisbane's here, what time is it in Adelaide? So for B, 2 p.m. Brisbane. So 2 p.m. in Brisbane, there's only a half hour time difference from Brisbane to Adelaide, and they are half an hour earlier. So it's going to be 1:30 p.m. in Adelaide. Just to throw an extra layer of complication in, we've got daylight saving. So daylight saving happens during the warmer part of the year, mostly for people that work in offices. The people who farm don't particularly like daylight saving, but people who work in offices like to take advantage of the extra hours of sunlight. And so that changes the clocks by 1 hour in October and then back in April. So a way to remember it is with your clocks, you spring forward. So in spring, we move our clocks forward. That's the April time. And we fall back. So in October, where it's autumn, or as the Americans say, fall, we fall back, we move our clocks back. So when that happens, if you have New South Wales being 0, Queensland becomes an hour behind, South Australia becomes half an hour behind, Northern Territory becomes 1.5 hours behind, and Western Australia becomes 3 hours behind. So if it's 10:20 in December in Adelaide, so it's in December, that means we're using our daylight saving map. So in Adelaide, which is in our blue state here, what time is it in Perth? So there's 2.5 hours difference. And that means it's 2.5 hours earlier than 10:20. So we did a bit of time stuff the other lesson. So let's take 2 hours off. That's going to be 8:20 a.m. is your 2 hours. And then we have to take another half hour. And so that's going to be 7:50 a.m. in Perth. Now, I'll be honest, the easiest way these days is in fact to use technology and to just ask Google what the time is somewhere if you need to. But this is mathematically the way that you go about it. There are official maps, and that's how Google knows what time it is anywhere. So this is today's lesson. So you need to do exercise 1504 from your textbook and make sure that you get these reference notes tidied up.